Okay, so in today's lesson we're going to look at making some foliage, predominantly some trees, with two different types of effects, one more realistic and one more stylized. So the first thing we're going to do is go to create new. We want to go to the art and illustration tab and create a 1000 by 1000 pixel grid. We're just going to name this realistic tree, and we're going to actually set the background this time to 50% grey. So by clicking on this white icon here, we can then move this selection down to about 50. To make this accurate, we can go to the HSB column, and on the B type in 50, and that will reset our icon at 50% grey. We're going to click OK, and we're going to click create. So first thing I'm going to do is create a new layer, and I'm going to push B to go to the brush, and using the squared brackets I'm going to increase the brush size, and just really quickly explain why we're using 50% grey. Very simply, if I add white, things look brighter, and if I add black, things appear darker. And what this means is that we end up with a range of tones, and this mid background actually allows us to create tonal variation, both increasing the brightness and decreasing the brightness. If we was to work on just white, then obviously would be constantly decreasing, and if we was to work on black, would be constantly increasing. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to call this bush. And what we're going to do is go to window and open up the brush settings, and from here we're looking for this brush. So you might open up onto here, but what we're actually looking for is the number 174, and that brush looks like this. Okay, so that sort of shape. Once you have that shape, we're actually going to adjust this slightly. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll take the size down for now, something about 50, 60, something like that. And what we're going to do is firstly go down to shape dynamics, and we're going to turn on our size jitter. We're then going to turn on the angle jitter further down to about, I think, 50. We'll try for about 45, and we're then going to go into scattering, and we're going to increase that scatter, and we're going to go back up to brush tip space. So sorry, under scattering we go to the top on scatter and just take that up. I'll put it onto 200. Maybe I'll try a little bit less at 150 actually for now, and we click on brush tip shape. And then we're going to look at this here. We have two choices. We can either set it based on these, or we can push on these points. We actually want to make this brush thinner. So by clicking on this round dot and moving it down until we hit about kind of 30%, and then we end up with this kind of texture. Okay. So the next thing that we want to do is we actually want to turn the opacity down to about 10%. Okay. And once it's on 10%, you will see that it's really faint. So I'm now going to change the colour by clicking on the colour icon down here, and this time I'm going to make this like a dark navy blue, like such. And I'm actually going to make my window bigger now, and push Command 0 to frame it. So there's two ways of using this brush. The first one is that if we push down and just colour in the area without taking the brush off the table, it will only stay at that 10% that we've created. So in order to get this to be effective, I have to kind of keep lifting up and redrawing in with the pen. So each time I make a mark, I'm retaking the pen up, and I'm just going to keep adding more bits on. So I'm actually going to try and vary up the shape, and the key here is that I'll increase the size a little bit. I actually want the bottom part of the tree. This is like imagine this is the underside, where we're actually trying to create the shadow. So in many respects, this is like the back part of the underside of the tree where there is lots of shadow, and this is why we're using the dark blue. Okay, and we want all these subtle changes in tone because ultimately trees, the leaves have light pass through them, and there's all these small kind of gaps where things bounce through, and so using a texture like this will allow us to kind of mimic that effect. So again, we're just going to keep working up. I'm going to increase the opacity quite a bit to like 50, just to really kind of speed up that process, especially on this underside part. And what we're going to do is then just make a smaller brush, kind of bring some of that out. Okay. And at this point I'm going to try and just get some little bushels, so circular shapes, to kind of complement where the the lighter colours are going to go, and then obviously underneath as well. Just going to try and do that down here. So it looks a little bit like a cloud. Then what we're going to do is go down to the colour picker down the left hand side, and we're just going to move this icon here and move to green, so we want something in the same area. And then with the brush, I'm actually going to turn the opacity back down to about 25. I'm then going to start to paint in this darker green. So this darker green will be found kind of over the majority of this blue, so it should cover, especially at the top part, it should definitely cover them, because we want to kind of show that there's not such a high concentration of leaves at those points, but there are still bits of shadow and darkness that still kind of creep through from where that thickness builds up. So remember to take your pen off the pad and keep pushing it back on, and that way you'll get the depth coming through quicker. So remember, this is as much about the brush that you've created as well as the technique that you use to draw. Okay, and as we start to do this, you'll start to see the blue come through. So at the moment I'm treating the light as coming in from this direction, so let me just change my brush slightly. So the light's coming down from here, so everything in this direction will be affected by should be green, because that's where the light is coming from. So just remember that we have to work with the light, what's visible, what shines through. And all the rest of it. So again, I'm just going to increase the opacity again, just to speed up some of the areas, especially where in this middle area here. We obviously don't want to get rid of the shadow completely, so you still want that to come through, but we're going to keep layering up the green. And so once that's in, there we have. So now what we're going to do is start lightening the scene. So we're now going to actually just start to creep up here, so, and then just start to add this in. So I'm going to be a little bit more tappy at this point as well, because and you can kind of hear that come through as I'm tapping, as well as striking. It's a combination of the two. And kind of just want to start to bring out those lighter areas. And we'll start to see that form start to come through. And obviously if we go to the colour up here, so we can use that colour picker, but obviously on the right hand side we've still got that colour selected, so let's use over here. And we're now just going to start to be a little bit more thoughtful with where we actually apply the lightness to create that tree effect. So you want to think of the trees as having little round bushels, to kind of aim and target that light and shadow. Because that's how ultimately trees look. So by targeting where we are, as you can see, I'm thinking about where that light's coming in, and I'm trying to get the greenery to come out that way. I'm actually going to start to add some more down here, some bits that stick out over the front. As well. And again, we're going to start just to go a little bit more lighter, and it really is just a case of building this up. And now I'm just going to start to tap a lot more as before, to really kind of exemplify those real lighter areas. As well. And then we're going to go right to this far corner and start to just bring that in. Again, I'm just going to be a little bit more sporadic with these. I'm going to actually start going over some of these darker areas, but I'm being really light with it. I'm not going to go intense, so I'm just going to start to just bring a little bit more vibrancy in, just to minimize the level of contrast that's kind of happening. Okay, sometimes it can be a little too high. And then we're going to actually just get some white and just very lightly use that in these kind of high contrast areas. And eventually we are gonna add in some yellow as well. Okay, so go down here, or orange even. I think orange, sort of somewhere in between the two, and that will just start to add a little bit of colour depth to our scene. Especially in those higher parts. Okay, so I'm just going to erase those white lights at the white parts that we've put in earlier to show the light direction. Don't really need those anymore. Okay, and I'm just going to start to just cut into this a little bit. Actually going to work back into that part. In fact, I actually want this area to be, this central area just to be a little bit higher, I think. So what I'm going to do is now push B to go back to the brush, and this is just reshaping. You don't need to worry about doing this yourself, but I'm now just going to start to reshape the tree a little bit. Just give it a bit of a higher peak. So again, by holding the Alt, I think for you yourself it's the Alt key, or one of those keys around there, you'll be able to actually pick the colour in the scene, as I'm doing. You can kind of pick out colours that you want to use. So again, once we start to get that come through, and actually I'm just going to start adding a little bit of white again as we did before. There we go. Okay, so I've just done a little bit of reshaping, and now I'm kind of ready to do the trunk of the tree. So I'm going to add a new layer, picking up the pause controls for that. So let's just move that up a little bit, and we're just going to call this trunk. And what I'm going to do is just bring that underneath. So just as an experimental piece, what we're going to do is actually use the same brush on the trunk. So this time we're going to just pick a kind of mid kind of tone that looks kind of brown. Oh, I picked the wrong thing there. And what we're going to do is just start to actually shape that out. Okay, so what I kind of want to see is a kind of branch coming down there, branch coming down here, one here. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up the opacity for this. So we want kind of one coming down there. And we'll sort of get one down here. So you just kind of do the shape on that. I actually think the branches are starting too low, so let's just erase some of this and actually let's make this a bit more compact. So actually what we're going to do is just bring up the trunk right up to here and then have the kind of arms break away. Around there. And bring that up as well. I'm actually going to make a smaller brush because the scattering, in fact actually we'll keep the brush as it is, but we'll kind of turn down the scattering, I think, to about 40, so we've got a bit more control. There we go. And what we're going to do is turn up the colour dynamics, turn on the colour dynamics, have apply per tip, and have a saturation and brightness at about 20%. And that's actually just going to allow us just to draw in just a bit of texture for us to work back into with this tree. Okay, because one of the things that we obviously want to be a little bit careful of is the fact that we want to keep some texture in there. And once we've got that kind of drawn in, I'm actually just going to reposition this whole trunk underneath. So with pushing V, we're going to select, we were literally just going to click and drag this, and as you can see those branches kind of appear through. It's very subtle, but it does make a difference in terms of where we are at. So we're just going to bring this up to somewhere around here, I think. And at this point then, going back to our brush by pushing B, we can start to just add in some more kind of branches underneath that surface that should kind of appear through and, you know, allow us to kind of get a feel for the tree, because we will feel those browns come through the leaves as well. Sometimes it'd be difficult to see the mouse cursor. There we go. So we're now going to start to add some depth to this. So we're going to actually just use a darker brown, and this time we're just going to start to apply that shadow across the areas where there are shadow. I'm actually going to try and sketch this a little bit more, so I'm actually just going to use like the more of a drawing approach to this, and that way I should hopefully get some make it kind of feel just more like a tree through the illustration and the kind of the shadows that you'd get, those kind of straight line shadows that you'd get from a tree, and remember the majority of this side would be in shadow if the light's coming from this direction. So again, we can kind of be a little bit more bolder with the way we apply this. Okay, and we can certainly get a bit more shown through here. And then what we're going to do is go lighter this time towards the kind of whites, and this time we're just going to sort of add in, do the same thing, just in fact it's going to make the brush just a little bit smaller than that. So I'm going to take it down to 15 and just sort of see, there we go. You just kind of want those little bits of highlights coming in, but we don't want to completely destroy or remove the surface. So the other thing is as well, what we're going to do is we're actually going to zoom in, and by pushing Command plus you can use the magnifying glass down here, and actually what we're going to do is just complement some of these darker lines by adding this brighter line next to it, and that will create what we call a contouring effect, whereby the shadow is preceded by a sharp bright line, and it just makes it that little bit more believable for us. So there we have our tree. I mean, I'm not quite happy with the design of the trunk. Giving it a bit more thought and a bit more time, or doing a bit more research into my references would help with that. But again, we have an effect that's been utilised and been created by utilising the brush functionality, okay, and by using the same brush throughout. So when we're close up to this, it just looks like a bunch of splatters, and you can kind of see the actual brush, but at a distance we start to see, our eyes start to merge that together, and we get a nice kind of effect coming through. So we're now going to go to File. You can save your work by pushing Command S. We'll go to File, Save As, and save it. And then we're going to go to New, and this time we're going to call this Stylized Tree. We're going to click, I want 50% grey again, so just keep that so fine. Click Create, and we're going to create a new layer, and again we're going to call this Brush. So first thing we're going to do is going to go to the brush tool, and we're going to go into the folders, and we're looking for Kyle's charcoal brush. So if you can't find it, basically go to this dial down here. If you're looking at all these and you can't see it, just make the appearance of these really big, and what you're looking for is Kyle's, I think it might be the charcoal pencil. There we go, Kyle Ultimate Charcoal Pencil, 25 pixels, medium 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to go with that, with green again, and we're going to pick a really kind of vibrant, saturated green. And we're going to take the brush up to about size 100 or 125 even. And what we're going to do is just draw in a circle about this big. Okay. And from this, what we're then going to do is go back to our general brushes, and we're going to pick the hard round brush, and we're then going to go into the opacity. We're going to turn this down to about 10, and we're going to pick from over here a dark green like that. There we go. Yeah, okay. So we now want to pick we're going to create a new layer, and we want to mask the area so that when we're painting on this, we only keep it within the area we want. So we're going to go and hold Command and click on the image of the layer, and then on layer 1, which we're going to rename Shadow, we're then going to push the masking button, which is here. What we're then going to do, because it's selected on the mask at the moment, and we can tell this because our colours are black and white, we're going to click on this image here, and now it's gone back to colour, our colours have returned, and we're going to zoom in by pushing Command plus. If you're on Windows, it's Control, and now we're just going to start to kind of add shadow in. Okay, we can hold down R and rotate our canvas, which will allow us to build those in quite nicely. And the shadow that's coming through is quite sharp, so I'm actually gonna make the brush slightly smaller. I'm going to turn down the opacity to about 5 or 6. Okay, and now I'm just going to kind of sketch in, doing more sketching at the bottom and getting lighter as I go up. So the reason that we're doing this is that when you look at trees, you know, they have a lot of textures and tones that appear through, and we want to create some subtle variation underneath that. So by constantly working in and making different strokes each time we do it, you can see all that subtle variation, all those small tonal differences will feed through into our final piece. So remember, we pushed the R key and that allowed us to get the canvas to rotate. So we're almost there now. I'm kind of quite happy with this. I'm going to push the R key, and if I hold shift, it will snap back. Okay, it's not quite, yeah, that's fine. With the shadow kind of at this sort of angle, it's not completely, well, maybe I'd want it a little bit more central. I mean, maybe perhaps I could rotate both of the layers, but for now it's fine. We'll kind of go with this angle. And obviously I can always create an eraser brush with the same settings and sort of take away. So the next thing we're going to do is now add in some more texture using some spots that won't necessarily be wholly visible, but the subtle change in the pixels will feed through to the overall image. So what we're going to do is try and select a tone in the middle here. So something in the middle, something like that. And what we're going to do is go to our brush settings by going to Windows, Brush Settings, and if you've got it on the side here, you'll be fine. And what we're going to do is go to Shape Dynamics, and we're going to turn on Size Jitter all the way. We are going to go to Scattering and turn that up slightly. And on Brush Tip Space, we're going to take our spacing up to about 150. So let me just turn this on again. Our opacity is really low. Turn our opacity up to about, there we go, I think to about 50 is fine. And all I'm going to do is just start to draw in some of these. Okay, and what this is actually doing again is just further breaking up that light and shadow with a little bit more depth in a way that you would expect to see. I'm then going to start putting in some further shadow with the brush as well, and we can mask this later if we want to, and I can also go in and add some light back in. Okay, just kind of keep building that up, and we're now starting to see nice depth kind of appear through, and we're just going to call this layer spots. And to mask it, we can click on the layer underneath, go to this layer here, and we can click mask. And even that in its own right could be a technique that you use to create a tree. Well, we're going to go and add one more layer to this, and this is going to be using the mixer brush tool. So click on the mixer brush tool, and we're going to create a new layer. We're going to make sure that this button up in this corner, sample all layers, you know what, actually let's try it without it on. And normally what would happen is it would pick the colour underneath and mix it all together, but let's just try and see if we can get this to work quite nicely. It doesn't seem to be making any colour at the moment. There we go. So now that I start to paint it in, there we go, brilliant. Okay, so what we're going to do is, with the mid-tone, we're just going to start to add in the mid brush, and then we can select a darker tone. start to add in down here. And what we're going to just do is we're going to build this up. And as we go through the course of this, it should start to create a nice bright effect. And I think we're going to be best off using this here. So it's not coming out as nicely as I wanted initially, so we're just going to keep working with it until we get I get the actual kind of style that I'm looking for. So at the top here, I'm just going to, maybe the white is a little bit too much, so let's go get like a light green. And what we're going to do, in fact, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. So we're going to get extra dark down here. And we're then just going to start to build up as we go up. This tree. So I think what we need to keep doing is cleaning the brush, going back up here, selecting a new colour, and that is going to allow us to keep bringing that in. So clean the brush, get the next colour up, and slowly that effect will start to come through as we get that gradient kind of tone come through. Okay, and so we end up with a nice kind of gradient, and we can kind of keep it like that, but to make it more rounded and keep them within that style, we're going to create that mask again by holding Command and clicking on the brush layer. Then click it, making sure we have this layer selected and clicking on the mask option. Okay, and then just calling this leaves. So obviously that's tidied it up, it's kept it within, and now we have that nice kind of gradient appearing through. If we was to turn down the opacity of this layer by going to the layers panel, clicking on opacity, we can start to get a bit more of a blend kind of come through between the spots and the leaves. And we could also try swapping those layers over so we get the spots at the top, and turning the opacity down on those to play around with the blending of the colours as well. Okay, so there's a number of options available for kind of creating textures as well. By blending those brushes together using these techniques. I'm going to actually put the spots underneath and just turn the leaf one down slightly to about 60, 65. So you can kind of see those circular shapes, we can see the kind of leaf shapes, and we get a nice kind of mixture, and we've got that gradient kind of happening as we get closer to our light source. So finally, we're now going to basically create the stem of the tree. So we're just going to go into the brush tool, and we're just going to go and select the hard round pressure size brush, which is here under general brushes, and for this, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to call this trunk, and obviously we're going to bring this down underneath all of the top layers, and we're going to reset the opacity to 100, and we're going to select a brown. Going to go very typical with what we'd expect to see, maybe a bit lighter, just to, there we go. And following this, I'm just going to literally create a stump that kind of decreases in size as it gets higher. So I'm just going to, and actually I'm going to make this a little bit bigger as well. So I'm actually just going to sketch at this point to kind of do this. And then what we're going to do is literally just create these little kind of arms that come off. In fact, it's going to make the brush smaller initially for that, for those first few. So these have actually been inspired by Evendell. So if you attended the lesson, you will have seen that influence. So have a look at Evendell's stuff on work on the Sleeping Beauty castle landscape, and you'll kind of see trees that have a kind of similar layout design to these. I'm just going to keep working that till I get the kind of shape that I want. As I go further down, I'm just going to increase that brush size as well. So the key is to just kind of be quick. So once we have that in, what I'm going to do is just go to Image, I'm going to go to Adjustments and create a, go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and go to Hue and Saturation, click OK, drag it from the Layers panel here by clicking on it and drag it to the top, wait till you see that blue bar appear, let go, and we're then just going to play around with the colour. Do you find something that you quite like, something that's a bit different? I quite like that bluey purple. And there you have it. So we now have a kind of cool, kind of quirky tree. I'd probably rework the branches and tidy up the bottom and so on and so on. But for our lesson today, that's how we create a stylized tree. So we've gone with realistic, kind of looking at those kind of traditional processes, and we've created something more stylized, incorporating the blending of elements that we can do with digital tools. If you have any questions, drop me an email, and I look forward to seeing you next week.